Well, good evening there, church family. I hope you are doing well and that you are warm and safe and dry, and you continue to stay that way for the rest of the week. Tonight we're going to be in John 8, verse 12. Yes, just one verse, and it's kind of fun that there's no crowd here because I don't get to hear any of you groan when I mention just one verse. But John 8:12. So, did everyone have a fun Valentine's Day weekend? I think we all did, didn't we? With this tremendous ice storm, no power, no internet, no cell service depending on where you lived, no landlines for a lot of you. Did you see the picture of the line at Bojangles on Sunday? I think that line stretched all the way to American Hero. I know a lot of you lost trees and had damage done to your property. There were trees down, there were power lines down, there were car wrecks. It was a pretty rough weekend, and a lot of us just got power back within the last 24 hours. My backyard during all of this, and I probably should have taken a video of it, my backyard during all of this sounded like a big bowl of Rice Krispies, the full-blown snap, crackle, pop. But the pop was usually followed by a whomp, because there went another tree or another treetop. But it wasn't too bad during the day, because we had the sunshine coming through the windows, and we could see what was going on. In fact, the further away treetops that broke off, the kids actually kind of enjoyed getting to see it while it was going on. But then nighttime came, and bedtime came, and it was really hard for me to get to sleep, because right when I would doze off, snap, crackle, pump, whomp. And I'm like, oh dear Lord, thank you that I didn't hit the house. As another treetop broke or another tree was uprooted altogether. It was a really long night. It was a long night for most of us, I imagine. In the morning, I went outside and I started snapping photos of everything that had fallen. And I'm like, I know it's going to be a while before my yard resembles normal again. And that's without factoring in whatever might happen tomorrow and Friday. You're all certainly in our prayers for warmth and safety and for trees missing us. But electricity and the light that it brings is something right up until this past weekend I bet a lot of us took for granted. But it only takes a little bit of time without it before we start to appreciate it. Tonight we're going to talk about Jesus being the light of the world. And that's where we are in John 8:12. Then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. So last time we went through the woman caught in adultery in John 8:1-11. We talked about how that really was just a trap set up by the Pharisees and Sadducees to catch Jesus in something, to find some way to disqualify Jesus. They started in John 7 challenging his words. They failed his qualifications, and they failed his background, his birth, circumstances of his birth, and they all failed. And so now they're setting a much more elaborate trap to challenge his wisdom and his character. It's one thing to make grandiose statements. It's another to actually put those statements into action. As we've seen from a lot of our own leaders and our own politicians, they have many words, but very few worthwhile actions. And so they set up this trap to challenge Jesus' wisdom and character. They used fake outrage masquerading as righteousness, and they found themselves convicted beyond measure by a one-sentence sermon where he says, he who is without sin, let them cast the first stone. So there's a bit of a time gap here in John 8 between verse 11 and verse 12. And we tend to miss that as we're not careful. Because I've talked about this before, but we read through the Bible, we read through chapters of the Bible, and for us, it's all happening at one time. And so while we're reading John 8, 1-11, this is one story. We get to verse 12, and we miss that there's a little bit of a time skip. We think this is followed up right after it. but it's not. We know it's sometime after John 8, 1 through 11. But we don't know how much, but it's probably a short amount of time given what we're going to learn as we continue to go into John chapter 8. And so here in John chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus is speaking to the people again. He says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. The reason I wanted to do this is one verse, because this is the way Jesus presents it. It's one verse. It's another one-verse powerful sermon. And here he is proclaiming a powerful message of his deity. And we know this. We've heard it in sermons and songs and books about Jesus. But I think it's one of those things we've heard so much, we almost kind of take it for granted. Like the power and electricity we have. We know it's always there. But do we really understand it? Well, what do we understand about light in general? The main thing, the youngest child that can start to string a couple of sentences together will tell you about light, is that it gets rid of the darkness. I was one of the many children who had a night light growing up in my bedroom, and it made the room less scary. My children have all either had night lights or at least had the door cracked open so there can be light from the hallway or light from the bathroom. But light always removes darkness. And the brighter the light is, the less darkness we have. After all, we all know the difference between having a sunny day and having a cloudy day, between having a sunny day and having a moonless night. The contrast between light and darkness is a common running theme in both the Old and the New Testaments. And it's presented as a literal contrast in some instances and a metaphysical contrast in others, resembling good and evil, God and the devil, believers and unbelievers. The Bible never once, though, entertains the thought that darkness is in equal power to God's light. God is the absolute sovereign who rules over the darkness and the powers of evil. Paul talks about this in Colossians chapter 1 when he says, He has delivered us from the power of darkness, that we have an inheritance in the saints in the light. The importance of light over darkness is actually the opening theme of the entire Bible. There in Genesis 1:2, it tells us that darkness was over the face of the deep. But in verse 3, the first act of creation, God said, let there be light. God spoke, and light came into being. Darkness and light are actually rather provocative words in the ancient biblical Hebrew. Darkness represents the antithesis, the opposite of God. Wicked, judgment, death, sin, self, Satan. These are all Old Testament concepts, all Old Testament allusions and metaphors for darkness. While light in and of itself is not divine, it is used metaphorically for life, salvation, the Scripture, and the divine presence of God. In the first creative act, God sees the light, but then God declares it good. Throughout the Old Testament, light is used to symbolize God, and more importantly, to symbolize God's presence. The Old Testament talks about something that we were taught in seminary. It's called the Shekinah glory of God, the brightness of God, that it was so much that Moses couldn't even look upon it, had to turn his back. That Moses, upon meeting God, just reflecting God's light, God's glory, the people made him put a veil over his face. Old Testament themes of salvation, goodness, truth, and light are always associated with God, but also almost always associated with light, and specifically being light to the world. And this is really important to know and understand, because Jesus is standing in front of the Old Testament experts, the people that knew it backwards and forwards. And he says, I am the light of the world. It's not claiming to be a candle. It's not claiming to be a flashlight. It's not even claiming to be a lightning bolt. And here in Roxborough, when we get those spring thunderstorms, the ones that potentially spawn tornadoes, you have those big cracks of lightning that are so bright that for a moment it looks like it's daylight. outside. But Jesus is not even saying that. He's saying that he is the light of the entire world. And you've got to understand and appreciate the wordplay here. What lights up our entire world? The sun. And here is the sun saying, hey, I'm the sun. He's presenting himself as God in the flesh. The Pharisees got this immediately. They are not happy about it. Jesus goes on to say, he who walks with me shall not walk in darkness. Have you ever walked in darkness before? A lot of us did this weekend. When I was a teenager, me and my cousin Jonathan went to the Warren County Fair. I know a lot of you are thinking, I know where Warren County is. You're lucky you didn't get stabbed. Well, that's actually where I'm from, out in eastern North Carolina, a little town called Dorlina. And so we were down there visiting my grandma. It was the fair weekend there in the fall. And so we went to the Warren County Fair one lovely weekend afternoon. And if you've never been to the Warren County Fair, which I assume would be 99% of you, or if you've never been to any kind of small town fair or small county fair, you really missed out. These were a big deal in the 90s, and they were a lot of fun. You go and you got your fried dough and your fried cotton candy and your fried whatever else, because whatever was there, they fried it, and it was delicious. And then you had the rickety rides run by sketchy-looking people. And this is before you could look people up on the internet to see if there were murder or warrants out for them, because it probably was. You know, and you weren't sure what was scary, the guy running the ride or the ride itself. And, you know, teenage me ate this up. And so then we went to the haunted house there. Haunted house was a very, very generous description for what we paid for tickets to go through. Imagine a hollowed-out, single-wide trailer painted completely black, spray painted completely black. Now, imagine you went out to Lowe's and bought a bunch of plywood and cut it up and kind of made a maze through this single wide trailer and painted all of that pitch black. And then you shoved people inside. That was it. That was the entirety of this haunted house me and my cousin Jonathan went through. It was pitch black inside. Could not see my hand in front of my face. And we're there just bumping around, trying to find the exit, bumping around. And then we find somebody. I don't know if he was supposed to be pulling out of the haunted house or not, but he's like, what's your name? And my cousin went, Jonathan. And the guy goes, cool. And that was the entirety of our interaction with the random guy in the haunted house. We eventually fumbled our way out of the exit. And we were so relieved to get out of that thing and to be able to see again. Though it hasn't seemed like it recently, there is a significant gospel witness still present in America. Just here in Person County, we have 80 plus churches. We've got a Christian bookstore. You see Bible verses on signs for local businesses. We have things like My Life Matters in the schools. We've got a Caleb station. We've got churches that broadcast and podcast and are on the local TV station. And then while everyone that lives here is not Christian, there is a lot of light in our community, and everyone as a whole benefits from that. And by contrast, I can tell you stories of spiritual darkness I've seen in both foreign and domestic mission trips. Pastor Dave and Pastor Drew will share similar stories. And many of you that have been on church mission trips, whether it was Alaska and Vermont and teams we sent to other places with very small church presence, or people who went to other countries, who went to Asia, who went to Honduras, who went to the Philippines. You can talk about the spiritual darkness you saw. But you also can talk about how the more light we shone in the darkness, there were more people that were able to find their way out. They were able to walk in the light. And this is what Jesus is talking about, is that we walk with him. Because when we're not walking with him, we're completely in darkness. We're stumbling around in that haunted house. We're in a house without power, without electricity, without anything. He goes, but you walk with me, you're no longer in darkness, but you have the light of life. As I was putting together this sermon, I had to go old school. At this point, I've been very spoiled by technology and putting together my sermons. Of course, I break out my Bible, that I preach here on Wednesday nights. But generally, most of it's done on the laptop. I've got my music playing through my earbuds and my phone. And you're streaming that off the Wi-Fi. I'm on my laptop, and I've got Blue Letter Bible pulled up, and I've got all sorts of commentaries and all sorts of sermons pulled up, and I can copy and I can paste and I can look stuff up and I can get distracted and all manner of things while I'm putting together a sermon. But I didn't have that for any of this. I had to do like old school, like I used to do, pre-internet. I had to break out the books, and I broke out my Baker Theological Dictionary from when I was in seminary. And it's such a blessing that I did. It says here, referring to the light, Jesus being the light, it says, those responding to the light are ushered into the sphere of life in which darkness is dispelled. Salvation brings light to those in darkness. Jesus Christ is life-giving light, in whom is life, and those who follow him will never walk in darkness, but we will have the light of life. Life possesses powers essential to true life. The meaning here to live is both life eternal and life temporal. The revealed will of God provides light to the heart, soul, and mind, providing guidance to a dark world. But Jesus gives a caveat here, because we think about this and we go like, almost this sounds too good to be true. And realistically, beloved, it is when we're honest with ourselves, honest about our sin. But there's a stipulation. He says, before all this, he says, he who follows me. It's only in following Jesus that we have any semblance of light. I can remember when I first got saved back in February of 1998. In fact, it was actually 23 years ago this past Monday, February 15th. I showed up here on a Sunday, February 15th, 1998. First Sunday I ever sat here. And I just felt loved. And it was really when I decided, you know what, I'm done doing things my way. I'm going to do things Jesus' way. I want to follow him. I want to walk in that light. The next Sunday, David preached, and this was when he was still a deacon. He preached on the two great commandments. And this is back in 98, so to record the sermon, we had an old cassette tape player. Kids, you can Google an image search that is to see what kind of technology we're working. But you had to physically press record and then physically press stop when you were done. And he handed the tape recorder to me, and he's like, can you record my sermon for me? And I said, sure. But first I ran out to my truck in the parking lot, and I put in Best of Jimi Hendrix, and I did the opening guitar licks to Voodoo Child, and recorded that, stopped, and then recorded this sermon. And then while he's out shaking hands, I took that, and then I hit record again for the exit for Jimi Hendrix. And so later he was like, well, I guess that's what I get for having you record my sermon. Now I got Voodoo Child inside of it. But my view of the world changed, and it changed rather rapidly. And it changed for the better. I remember thinking within a week or two, I need to pray more. And then after that, I remember thinking, I need to find a Bible. I need to study the Bible. And I got the Bible and started reading it every day. And it's a habit I've continued these 23 years. And I felt like the blind man who got healed and told the Pharisees, I once was blind, but now I see. Then I remember going through my just different things in my life that weren't edifying. And there was music I tossed because of all the explicit lyrics and just the content of what it was singing about. There were friends I didn't hang out anymore. Not that they didn't need the Lord, but I knew if I hung out with them, I'd go back into the old ways. And I couldn't do that. And I wasn't strong enough to do that on my own. So I just prayed for them. I invited them to church. And I avoided circumstances I knew would make me fall. And things went really well from March to about June. About 3 months. Sunday, the previous Sunday, Pastor Dave was talking about how it's easier to walk with God in the valley than it is on the mountaintop. And I was on the mountaintop. And I started thinking I was doing things on my own. And I started thinking that I was the light. And darkness always follows that line of thinking. It's a fairly common theme in my walk with the Lord, and I imagine with most of yours as well. We walk, we do well, we get to the top, and we start thinking, look at me. And we stop saying, look at how far Jesus carried me. And I fell just like everybody else. And it's just been a constant struggle, and we know it. And I was sharing my testimony with someone the other day, and I was explaining some of the stuff I did, and they were like, that was incredibly stupid. I'm like, yes. And the worst part was, I knew it was incredibly stupid before I did it, while I was doing it, and after I did it. But it didn't change the fact that I did it, because I wanted to do my things my way instead of doing things the Lord's way, and I paid for it. Even in the preparation of this sermon, as I talked about, I got stuck right here at this specific point, and I started doing all sorts of things to break my writer's block. More importantly, to avoid having to finish this. I was cleaning up after dinner, and my beloved wife, Lindsay, asked me, goes, "Are you done with your sermon?" Because usually I tell her, and we walk through the process together. And I'm like, no, I'm trying to avoid my writer's block. And then she just gave me the look. When you've been married 16 years and together 20 years, your wife has to say very little to you at this point in general. She just gave me the look, and that was everything I needed to say. Because her version of it and my version of it is different. She says it's just a gentle reminder for you to do the right thing. I take away with it, you're being stupid, stop being stupid. So, but then I thought out loud, or I could pray. That would probably be a much better way to end this than me just trying to avoid it or trying to clever my way through it. I went back to our room. She gave me some time, peace and quiet time with the kids, and I sought the Lord. And I was reminded of all the things he did for me. And I was more importantly reminded that best case scenario, I'm a clean mirror for the Lord. I'm a reflective surface. I'm not the light itself. God is light. But more importantly, he's the light who dispels the darkness of this world. And if the last year has taught us anything, it's that there's an awful lot of darkness in the world. But there's hope, because Jesus came as the light of the world, and he broke through the darkness of sin by his work on the cross. As believers, we're called to be a light to the world as well. Jesus refers to us in Matthew 5 as light and light bearers. Paul tells us in Ephesians and Philippians that our lives are to be a shining light of witness to the world around them. We may think, what little can I do? My light is so dim. But when you're in pitch black darkness, even a little light stands out. And a lot of small candles lit in the same room can make a tremendous difference. What we have received from Jesus, we are to share with others. We're to shine our lights on the top of the hill so that all those in darkness can see it. And as we enter into the light of God's grace, we now bear the responsibility to shine that light upon others. And so Jesus can bring them into the light as well, remembering who is truly the light of the world. Let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for being the light of the world. We thank you that the circumstances of this life are temporary, but the promises we have in you are eternal. We know there's a catastrophic, as the news person said, ice storm on the way, but we know you're greater than all that too. And that you will provide for us and protect us as you see fit. And that regardless of our circumstances, may we use them to bring glory to your name. It's in Jesus' name for our sake. Amen. Good night. Stay warm and safe. Love you.